As always, we're glad to be able to be together and to do this Wednesday night Bible study virtually. We have, as I'm sure you're aware, but if you're not, we have begun to meet together in the auditorium on Sundays to have worship in person. And this coming Sunday, September 6th, we will be back to full Bible classes as well as our worship service, Bible classes for all ages. And so please join us. We do have some distancing measures in place, and we do have a room reserved in the back for those who wish to be more isolated and viewing the service that way. But we, again, have been meeting for a couple weeks on Sunday and would love to have you join us this coming Sunday for worship and then for Bible classes as well. This is the last class of Jeremiah and Lamentations that we've been spending the last 6 months studying. And so we will finish up with a review tonight, and then new classes will begin going forward. Philippians will be the Sunday morning class in the auditorium for the adults. Steve will be teaching that class starting Sunday, and actually I'll be covering for his first class on Sunday, so I will be doing some introductory stuff, but that's his class, so going forward he'll be teaching that on Sundays. And then Wednesday will remain a virtual class experience, and I'm hoping to send out an email to everybody here at the church about that in the coming days, so be looking for that, which will just simply be a note about how to make the most of the Wednesday virtual class going forward. But we are going to be finishing up Jeremiah tonight with a review, and on the website under Bible classes you'll find a link to a handout there to follow along, and we encourage you to do that with your Bible open and see what we can remember. I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for Jeremiah. With any Bible class, any Bible study that we do, but maybe especially a big book like Jeremiah, I mean, this is something that maybe every few years, every decade, I don't know, you get the chance to take on a huge book like Jeremiah and dig into it and study it. It takes several months to get through it, and I always think at the end, what are we going to remember from Jeremiah? When I look back next year on 2020, obviously there'll be a lot to think about, but I look back on our study of Jeremiah. Will I remember things about it? Will there be things that stick with me? In my Bible reading, I'm now in the middle of Isaiah, and Isaiah was our big project 2 years ago, and so reading back through Isaiah, I'm thinking to myself, what do I remember from our study of Isaiah back in 2018? And so tonight, as we review the book, it may be an opportunity to think about that and to think about a lot of these things that we've talked about already, the things that we've been trying to remember along the way. Can I get these things, can I take these snapshots to remember these things so that when I look back in a few months or in a year or 2 years or 5 years and think about Jeremiah, there are some things that readily come to mind that I have learned, I have imprinted on my brain, and will benefit me going forward. So that's going to be really the goal tonight, to not only recall some facts that we've tried to memorize about the book of Jeremiah, but more than that, to imprint the lessons that we've learned in Jeremiah that we also see in other parts of the Bible, and print those things on our heart and be better as a result of our study of this book. Before we jump into that, I will read, there's a note that was sent here from the Balderas family, and they say, "Brothers and sisters in God, we hope everyone is doing fine. We are fine too, thanks to God. Stay safe, hoping to see you soon." So we thank Rosa and Jose for that. And as I think Brian mentioned in another note that was read on Sunday, even those simple thoughts express how we all feel, having been isolated from each other for so long, and seeing each other and more of us each week. It is a joy to share this fellowship both virtually and in person as well. Okay, so if you're looking at your handout, I have listed out the 5 sections of Jeremiah, and I've put blanks there so that if you can try to remember what each of these sections, what title we gave them or how we described them, then you can fill those in as we go. So let's run through the 5 sections first, and then once we've done that, we'll go back and look at each section in particular, fill in some of the blanks of the verses that we were trying to remember over the last 6 months. And then with each section, we'll maybe dig a little bit deeper into one of the passages and talk about it in a little bit more detail. So we begin with the first 25 chapters, a huge chunk of the book devoted to oracles against Judah would be the answer to that. This is a main part of the book of Jeremiah. It is messages directed to God's people, to those in Judah almost exclusively, because by this point the northern kingdom has been taken away into captivity. And so the southern kingdom, Judah, is there about to suffer the same fate, but God through Jeremiah has message after message, oracle after oracle against Judah. Okay, then in 26 to 29, we have the first of 2 interludes, we call them, which is kind of like an in-between section or a transition section. And what kind of interlude is it? It is a historical interlude. These are stories. So this is different from the first 25 chapters by and large, which had messages or sermons or, again, these oracles. These chapters 26 to 29 are stories. We learn about the events that are transpiring during this time that involve Jeremiah. But it is an interlude then connecting us to the middle part of the book, chapters 30 to 33, which we call a book of comfort or the book of hope. And this is important because we've talked about how this is literally and symbolically central to the book of Jeremiah, that in the midst of all of the messages of judgment and the stories of the despair that is gripping Judah and Jerusalem during this time as Babylonian captivity comes to fruition, there is a message of hope and comfort for God's people right smack dab in the middle of all of this. Okay. Then in chapters 34 to 45, we have another historical interlude, a longer one that tells the stories of those final days in Jerusalem and what happens to the people after the final captives are taken away. And then in 46 to 51, we have more oracles, more messages with a similar ring of judgment as the first section of the book, but this time these oracles are given against the nations, the peoples round about Judah and Jerusalem, like Egypt, Moab, Ammon, and eventually Babylon as well. So those are the main sections of the book of Jeremiah. And so let's go through each of these one at a time and try to remember some of the words and phrases that are key in these sections. And then, like I said, with each of these, we'll do a little bit deeper dive into one of the passages in this section. Okay, this is the longest one. There are quite a few here, so let's take maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll go mute here, and you get a chance to look at your handout, look at the screen here, and fill in as many of these as you can. Go. Okay, let's run through these. And Robert here said these are easy, I guess, because of how many times we've done them. I hope that's part of the point of this, is to drill them into our heads. So let's see how you did. I think for the most part, these came across fairly well in terms of the graphics, but I think some of them get askew, so forgive me for that. Okay, chapter 2, they have forsaken me, God says, the fountain of living waters, and they have hewed out for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that hold no water. Chapter 6, they have healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. I think someone referred to this on the Monday night class in Ephesians. I forget the exact context of that, but that made me feel good. Or maybe it was our Saturday Zoom call, but some recently referred to that. Peace, peace, when there is no peace. Chapter 6, look for the ancient paths, walk in the good way, and you will find rest for your souls. So when we sing the song, or when you read that in Matthew, you can remember where that's from. Has this house, chapter 7, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your sight? More on that in a moment. And then we skip a while. I'm cognizant of this gap here, that these are fairly well spaced out, except for there's a missing chunk of the book here from chapter 7 to 20. I think there were some in there we had done before that I removed. But in chapter 20, we have a interaction between Jeremiah and God. Jeremiah is complaining about or calling out to God, crying out to God because of the difficulty of the work that he has been given to do as God's prophet. But he says, "Oh Lord, you have blank and I was blank." Same word in both of those. And it is deceived, which again is strong language for Jeremiah to say, you deceive me and you have overcome me and prevailed. You forced me into this. You tricked me into this, God. This is really the height of Jeremiah's consternation about what it is that he is asked to do and how difficult it is. But 2 verses later, the other side of that, and so really these 2 verses I think should be what come to mind when we think about Jeremiah's attitude toward the work he was given to do. Yes, it was difficult. Yes, he called out to God and said, "God, this isn't fair." But he says, "If I say I will not speak anymore in his name, then in my heart it becomes like a burning fire." So yes, Jeremiah called out to God. Yes, he vented maybe his frustration to God. But Jeremiah never stopped fulfilling the responsibility that he was given. He never shied away. And in the end, his obligation to speak the word was more powerful than whatever fears or difficulties he faced in doing that. Okay, so that's chapter 20. Chapter 23, a message of a promise here. I will raise up for David a branch, an important messianic term there that appears in multiple of the prophets. I will raise up for David a branch. His line will continue. His tree will continue. He will reign, the branch, as king and act wisely to do justice and righteousness. The duo there that is everywhere through the prophets especially. Okay, and then kind of a factual note here in chapter 25. The prophecy is that the whole land will be desolation and horror, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon for how many years? 70 years. Okay, and so that, again, is an important detail that comes out of Jeremiah, the length of the Babylonian exile. Okay, with each of these sections, I was interested to pull out one specific passage and then notice how that idea is either quoted or carried over in the New Testament. So let's do this one. We've mentioned this temple sermon over and over again, and we understand we remember the den of robbers phrase. But let's go back and remind ourselves of what it was that Jeremiah was calling out about the people. Because if you had to remember just one passage, one sermon, one message from Jeremiah's oracles, I think chapter 7 would be a good one to keep in your mind and just think about what it was that Jeremiah was saying about the people. And then, as we'll see, kind of carrying that forward and seeing how true that can be of generations after Jeremiah, including our own. But remember this sermon here. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house. Proclaim there this word and say, hear the word of the Lord, all you men of Judah who enter these gates to worship the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your deeds. I will let you dwell in this place. Do not trust in these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. You see the attitude expressed there in that mantra of saying, we have the temple. And Jeremiah calls those deceptive words. Second paragraph here. For if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, okay, so what God really wants, if you truly execute justice one with another, if you do not oppress the sojourner, the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own harm, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave of old to your fathers forever. This is what God really wants, okay? They took for granted, because they had the temple of the Lord, that they would be safe and dwell in the land. God says, no, there's all these things that you're expected to do as my people: live righteously, enact justice, worship me and me alone, so on and so forth. And then the third paragraph here: behold, you trust in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, go after other gods you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered, only to go on doing all these abominations? Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Remember, the den is not where the robbers do the stealing. The den is where the robbers hide out and assume that they are safe from all the evil they had been doing previously and that they're about to go do later on. I mean, you read this and it's pretty easy to get a picture of somebody, maybe us, that lives Monday to Saturday with no real regard for other people, looking out for our own, not really concerned about who we take advantage of, who we treat poorly, how we speak to other people, the effect our words might have on the people we interact with, not fulfilling our responsibilities as a husband or a wife or a father or mother, or a child to our parents, so on and so forth. And then after a week of living that way and worshiping the things that the world worships, like money and career and popularity and all that sort of thing, then we come on Sunday to here and we say, oh, well, I'm a part of the Church of Christ, the Church of Christ, the Church of Christ. And we assume that because we're worshiping in a certain place with a certain name on the sign, then we are exempt and will be fine in the judgment of God. And even we can point the finger at other people that are so wrong, that are going to receive God's judgment. And the sermon like this in Jeremiah 7 ought to sober us up a little bit and remind us about what God really wants, which is true worship, as well as and motivated by or coinciding with or connected to true living, righteous living, and exclusive worship and glory given to God. This is the idea of Jeremiah 7, and this is the idea that Jesus draws on in Mark 11 when he says, include the story here that they came, that is Jesus and his disciples, to Jerusalem. He entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching in them and saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? That's from Isaiah 56. But you have made it a den of robbers. That's from Jeremiah 7. And the chief priests and scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. Okay, so when you understand Jeremiah 7, you understand the point that Jesus is trying to make. Yes, it is the case that the activity going on in the temple was inappropriate. Okay, but you see that Jesus is not simply calling them out for saying, you're stealing from people here in the temple. That's really not his main point. His main point is that these people's lives, these people that are in the temple, performing these not only these operations and these services, so to speak, but also performing the worship itself and leading the people religiously, they are living lives of unrighteousness, injustice, immorality, so on and so forth. And yet they think that their connection to the temple and their worship there will somehow exempt them from God's judgment. And Jesus says, you've totally missed the point of what the temple is supposed to be, and implying that judgment will come upon them as it came upon those in Jeremiah's generation. And it's likely for that reason that it says that they wanted to destroy him, which, by the way, is the same response that Jeremiah got in the original temple sermon. And so it would not be a surprise that Jesus, in reenacting that temple sermon, receives the same response. Okay, so that's the first 25 chapters, and that one kind of example and those few memory verses are a way to encapsulate the messages given to Judah in the first 25 chapters of Jeremiah. Then we move on to this historical interlude. There's three things here And so I maybe will give you 60 seconds to look at them. The third of these we've had as a memory item before. The first two I made up for this review here as a way to just summarize some of one or two of the events that took place in this interlude here. So 60 seconds, see if you can remember these three things, and we'll come back in just a second. We can come back. Okay, these first two go together. I don't know if you remember this story here. Maybe there's enough clues in the context here to remind you of what was going on here. But this is an important, I think, again, transition here from what we've just been talking about. Okay, so all those oracles in 1 to 25, say all of them, the primary gist of those oracles was the condemnation for your sin, Judah, and the punishment that's coming. And so Jeremiah acts that out. In chapter 27, God tells Jeremiah to wear a yoke. Yeah, not like the yolk of an egg, but the yoke that you would put on oxen. And that symbolizes the submission that they're going to give, as well as these other nations, to Nebuchadnezzar. This is the punishment for their sins, okay? Servitude to the king of Babylon. But in chapter 28, one of those false prophets that we remembered being addressed in the first section of the book, who healed the wound of my people lightly, saying peace, peace when there's no peace, he takes it from Jeremiah in chapter 28, and he breaks it, okay? And his claim is, no, in 2 years, all this will be set right, okay? In 2 years, those that are in Babylon now will come back, and everything's going to go back to normal, okay? Remember, by the end of that chapter, Hananiah is dead, okay, within just a few months, and Jeremiah has been vindicated as the true prophet to say, no, Jeremiah is the one that's speaking the truth. This is not a 2 years and everything's going to be fine type of situation. This is a longer thing, okay? And to that point, then, I wanted to include in the same context, chapter 29, it's verse 11. Chapter 29, verse 11, the famous quote from Jeremiah, maybe embroidered in your house right now. I know the plans I have for you, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope, okay? This is the beautiful message of Jeremiah 29, but let's see all of this in its context here. So zooming in a little bit to this very passage. Notice what is going on, what the message is, and how that famous phrase fits in. Jeremiah 29, 10 to 14. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, we've talked about that, I will visit you, I will fulfill to you my promise, and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I will be found by you, declares the Lord. I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I've driven you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile. So a couple really important things that give the proper context or understanding to this God has good plans for me type of verse, okay? One is that it's a long-term vision, all right? In the short term, things are going to be very difficult. 70 years, that's a whole lifetime. The people that are adults going into this may not come back because they may not survive the 70 years. The younger people, maybe like Daniel, right, that lives and sees all this from beginning to end. But 70 years is a long time, and the punishment's going to last a long time, okay? So when God says, I know the plans I have for you for welfare and a hope, this is not a short-term thing. This is God's long-term vision that he has for his people that, by the way, many of the individuals themselves might not even see in their lifetime. Okay, so that's one important thing to understand about this. The other is that the welfare and the hope is inseparable from the rest of this. The seeking God with your whole heart, praying to him, being found by God because you are going to him. It's not just God's going to do good things for you. It's when you seek God and you pray to him and you call on him, there's a restoration of relationship. Repentance is a word that we've used throughout this class. That is necessary to this good that will be received from God by his people. And all of this reminds me of another cross-stitch type verse that is often, like Jeremiah 29, in fact, maybe more so, misunderstood by people or misquoted, and that is in Romans chapter 8. Remember that in Romans chapter 8, Paul says that we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. All things work together for good, right? That's a great sentiment that we love to keep in mind. But I'll remind you of the context of Romans 8, and notice, although there's no direct quotations here, notice what I'm suggesting is a parallel to Jeremiah 29 in terms of what's going on in the short term compared to the long term, and what is required of those who will be the recipients of God's good promise. This is what Paul is talking about in Romans 8. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we await eagerly the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. You notice that this whole passage of Paul in Romans 8 is talking about something that we do not have yet, that we're waiting for, okay? The hope that will be fulfilled when we see Jesus return and our bodies are redeemed and we receive the full adoption as the children of God. We're waiting for that, but the current situation is what? Groaning, suffering is what he's been talking about in Romans 8. The short term is difficult as we live in this broken and fallen world, having received the Spirit as first fruits, but still waiting for the fullness of the promise to be fulfilled when Jesus returns. That's that difficult in-between stage that Paul is describing in Romans 8, okay? So, continue here, the second paragraph. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses, for we do not know what to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Okay, so we have the Spirit to help us during this difficult in-between time of groaning and waiting. Okay, and verse 28, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So all things work together for good. What is that talking about? A short term, a guarantee that you know you're going to get that car and you're going to get that pay raise. You know, you're going to marry the person of your dreams. That is not at all what Paul is talking about in Romans 8. The good that God works all things together for is this eternal plan that he is bringing about that we may not see in our lifetime if we die before Jesus comes back, but will be revealed in that last day, and there will be good, welfare, and hope is the plan God has for his people. And we can bank on that even if we don't live to see it. Okay. And notice in here too, it's for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. He goes on to say those that are called are those that are conformed to the image of his Son. There is us, like in Jeremiah 29, having to seek him, draw near to him, call out to him, so on and so forth. That is wrapped up in all of this as well. Okay, speaking of hope, that verse in chapter 29 is a nice transition to the next section of the book, the central section in chapters 30 to 33. 4 quotations here from that center section of hope. And so take maybe 90 seconds or so to fill in these blanks from the book of comfort, Jeremiah 30 to 33. Go ahead. Okay, let's go through these real quick and then look more closely at chapter 31, which is, with chapter 7, is going to be one of the most memorable things that's going to come out of the book of Jeremiah. But first in chapter 30, the opening statement of this hopeful section of Jeremiah, behold, days are coming when I will restore the fortunes. That phrase shows up over and over again in the prophets. This is what God plans to do. Restore the fortunes of my people Israel and Judah. Behold, days are coming, chapter 31, when I will make a new blank, not like the old blank, covenant is what God plans to do. A new covenant, not like the covenant that he made with their fathers. Chapter 32, speaking of that covenant, an everlasting covenant, he calls it in that passage. They shall be my people, and I will be their God. Another phrase that shows up over and over again in the Bible from Genesis really all the way to Revelation. And I will give them what kind of heart and way? One heart and one way. And then in chapter 33, the two things that will perpetuate in this everlasting covenant: David shall never lack a man to sit on the throne, and the Levitical priests, will never lack a man before me. So king and priest together forever in the everlasting covenant. Jesus obviously fulfills that in himself as king and priest, but also even God's people. Again, 1 Peter 2, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That's who we are. Okay, just to remind you, this is the full quotation of Jeremiah 31 in the passage of the New Covenant, and all of this is quoted in Hebrews 9, okay? So we might as well be reading from Hebrews 9. This is the longest single quotation from the Old Testament that we find in the New Testament. But this is what is being described ahead of time in Jeremiah. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband. And we remember that language earlier in Jeremiah. I was their husband, declares the Lord. They broke the covenant. That's why there's a need for a new one, is because of the unfaithfulness to the old covenant, as well as God's eternal purpose for bringing about the new covenant after the old covenant was a tutor or a shadow to lead us there. But we continue here. This is the covenant, he says, that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God. They will be my people. They will no longer each one teach his neighbor or each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. So the picture of the new covenant is one in which there is a close, intimate connection to the Lord that each person has. You're in the covenant because you know God. You have this relationship that he's desired from the beginning, in which he is your God. You are part of his people. His law is not just written externally on paper or on stone, but it is written on your heart. It's internalized in your mind, in your heart. And it's a covenant in which sin has been dealt with, and sin is forgiven. Sin is taken away. And the book of Hebrews makes the point then that, of course, that is done through the work of Jesus. Through him, we have this new covenant established in which sins are removed forever, something the old covenant could never do. So this is the kind of concluding statement that the Hebrew writer makes after quoting Jeremiah 31, after describing how Jesus is the mediator of this new and better covenant. The Hebrew writer says, therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. I think what you get from reading Hebrews is you get this sense of urgency, because all the things that have been promised ahead of time in books like Jeremiah is now fulfilled. And you can just feel it as you read the book of Hebrews, the urging of the Hebrew writer to say, this is what you have available to you. These things that the prophets were longing to see, these beautiful, hopeful visions that people like Jeremiah had, now it is come to pass in Jesus. And it far surpasses anything else that we could give our attention or our efforts or our lives to. And so do not give up. I know it's going to be hard. I know it's been hard for you, the Hebrew writer will say even later on in chapter 10. But with that full assurance of faith, believing in the promises that God has made because he is faithful, draw near and hold fast and stir each other up and encourage each other together all the more as we see the day drawing near. Okay, so that's our confidence in reading Jeremiah on this side of the cross, is to know that all of this has been fulfilled, and that should instill in us more confidence, more excitement, and more urgency to do the Lord's work, because we are the benefactors of these great blessings. Okay, we have just about 4 minutes left, so we'll just run through the rest of this, and I apologize for not being more disciplined with the use of our time tonight and giving more attention, but the stuff we'll do at the end here is stuff that we've done most recently, so maybe it's more fresh in your mind and doesn't need as much review. But real quickly, in this second historical interlude, we have the stories really that lead up to the fall of Jerusalem and what happens after Jerusalem falls. So, Chapter 35, the Rechabites stay faithful to the commands of their ancestor by refusing to drink wine. And that becomes an example then of the unfaithful people of Judah who cannot keep the commands of their heavenly Father. In chapter 36, Jehoiakim, the king, hears the scroll of Jeremiah read out loud and responds by cutting it up and throwing it in the fire. So that encapsulates the response to Jeremiah in his time. In chapter 38, another response to Jeremiah. He's thrown into a muddy cistern until he's rescued by the original Ethiopian eunuch in chapter 38. Chapter 39, Jerusalem is finally destroyed, and Hezekiah has his sons killed and his eyes put out. And then in 41 to 43, the remaining Jews defy Jeremiah's warning, and they go to Egypt thinking they'll find safety there, but of course they do not. Okay, I had a couple passages here that really, we've talked about this before, so you're not missing much. Connect the idea of Jeremiah telling the people, surrender to Babylon if you want to live, and connecting that to the New Testament idea, the gospel message in Mark 8, for instance, of if you really want to live, to save your life, you have to lay down your life for the sake of Jesus and for the gospel, and it is through denying yourself, surrendering, that a person really gains their life. And there's this idea of exchange. What are you going to give in exchange for your soul? And the answer should be, I'm willing to give everything in exchange to have my life eternally. And that's what Jesus commands and calls for those who would follow him. Okay, about 90 seconds left here. And so we end the book really with a judgment on the nations. The judgment on the nations is a little bit different than the judgment on Judah. Judah is obviously condemned for covenant breaking. It's kind of the central rebuke. But the nations, though they don't have a covenant with God like the people of Judah did, the nations are still condemned in these chapters for their pride, for their arrogance, for their violence and cruelty, especially committed against God's people, and for trusting in false gods and trusting in their own strength. Okay, the caves of Edom or the deserts of Kedar or the walls of Babylon, they thought these things would keep them safe. No one could touch them. God is proving them wrong and humbling them in their pride and putting an end to their violence and cruelty. So the nations are judged from 46 to 51. And just had two things have talked about this fairly recently, so we'll move past it. The call in Jeremiah 51 to get out of Babylon, because Babylon is going to receive the same punishment for her sins as the other nations, and connecting that to the encouragement of the book of Revelation to get out of Babylon. Okay, and again, this is not a physical, literal, remove yourself geographically from Babylon. In Revelation, Babylon is a symbol for, in that point, Rome, but any nation of man, the way of man, the city of man that is in rebellion against God. And so the message is get out of that city and be wholly devoted to the Lord and live in his kingdom and be separate from the sins and the wicked ways of Babylon, lest you be caught up in her judgment as well. And then wanted to end with a message of hope. Remember that chapter 52 of Jeremiah, as the epilogue, recaps the destruction of Jerusalem, but ends with this wonderful picture of Jehoiachin, who is the heir in the line of the kings of David that will eventually lead to Christ. Jehoiachin, after Nebuchadnezzar's death, is exalted out of prison and put at the king's table and lives a comfortable life, has his needs provided for him. And that's the end of the book of Jeremiah, which is a subtle but sure signal that God has not forgotten the line of David. God has not forgotten his people, and he's still working to fulfill those promises, and that will ultimately be brought about in Jesus of Nazareth. And that's the book of Jeremiah. So like I said, we'll start Philippians on Sunday. I will be filling in, but that is Steve's class, and he's asked us to read Philippians every day in preparation and through that class to really meditate on those words. But we'll jump into that on Sunday, and we look forward to seeing everybody this weekend. Thanks a lot.